Thank y'all so much. One great gift of being here is obviously I owe so much. Funny enough, my St. Mary's degree, walking through a conference room in Minneapolis, and this big hulking guy is like, listen, you know what you need? You need to listen to me. I'll plan out your life. And that was Peter. Yeah, and I listened. That was the best part. But it's been such a great gift to me to be able to journey and grow into this. My time there, switch to being able to work for the church. But today I've been, wrestling with ideas and this concept. And so you're going to get a little bit of ADHD from me, but that's how it goes. I want to be able to kind of talk and wrestle with some stuff, including being able to talk with this, the class that I taught at For You, Mary. And one of the great gifts is I got the book to be able to give to our students. And they're like, you need to read this before you teach the course. And then we kind of need to talk about some Benedictine stuff, which I haven't heard yet. So you're welcome. But part of that is like this great gift of being able to see, like, what's this idea that Monsignor Shea came up with? And it was this idea, like, from Christendom, right, to apostolic mission. And I first read the book and I was like, I don't need this. I didn't say it like that. I mean, he is, Monsignor Shea. But I was like, it just doesn't seem to apply. And since the 5 years ago since I read it to now, I've not only come to be able to see the fruit of that, but being able to see that he was way ahead of his time, wrestling with the topic that I think we need to do and unpack today. And so the unpacking of that today is the unpacking of the idea that how does that translate to generosity? Have we ever wrestled with what does it look like for generosity in the apostolic age? Have you ever wrestled with that? Well, let's do it today. So, a couple of things. We know there's no doubt, this is a quick look at the landscape so you kind of know what we're going to be talking about. We'll talk about the landscape changing, evaluating generosity, kind of talking about some ways to be able to do that during apostolic mission, meeting people where they are, and that evolution all the way down to kind of what do we do applying it today. As part of the introduction, I would be remiss to be able to say that this is my why, right? So be able to be here. My youngest, which is Joseph, says, well, Dad, can you take a picture of everybody? And I was like, with them or of them? And he's like, with them. So you know what we need to do? We need to take a selfie. So get ready. This is for Joseph, y'all. Joseph needs to see that Dad's working. All right, 1, 2. All right, thank you. Joseph says thank you. This is just our team back home, also with the foundation, and I didn't include our I Give Catholic national team, but wanted to be able to kind of talk about the landscape first and foremost. And I think one of the things that inside of this is, most of the time, and I think this is scriptural, when we look backwards, what happens? We tend to kind of get either nostalgic or like, hey, look, this is how generosity was. And I think that was part of my reaction to Monsignor Shea's book, which was a little bit of like, look at those good old days. Instead of seeing like, where's his grace being able to unpack for tomorrow? And mostly for what? Today. Like, where's that look for us? And so one of the things that I see in I'm probably driving the cameraman crazy. I'm sorry. I'm going to like run over here. But what I realize is that, and it's a good concept to be able to understand, is that generosity is changing but not dying. So obviously the U.S. reached new heights in total in recent decades, but in the total giving, even through the pandemic years, and that people still give, it's just not the same way. And I think in understanding that, you were able to kind of see this landscape that tends to be able to look forward, look at numbers in the past and say, well, what is this? If we're kind of changing times, well, I'm not seeing it because what do I see? A little bit of that philanthropic capitalism, it's still growing. Like, right, we're fine, like no problems, nothing is there. But the reality is that there is changes going on, and you just take a second to be able to look on what that landscape looks like. You can kind of start to see in it. But it's definitely a shift in the cultural landscape that allows us to be able to see that these changes are coming. So the idea from Christendom to apostolic mission. Well, first of all, who's read the book? Hands? Monsignor Shea, would you agree with that? I'm just teasing. He's not in the room. All right. So I got y'all like, wait, say it. Especially with the students that you marry. I know you read it, Paul. But the best part is, when you're able to kind of unpack that book, there's part of the book that feels heavy because of the nature of kind of what's the things to come. And then there's part of it that says, well, what is God calling us to do inside of this apostolic age? And this is a gross oversummary. I'm glad Monsignor's not here. But the reality is that the culture and the Catholic faith and the whole Christianity was an assumed culture that you could kind of base your life over and your culture over, which is that there's a base understanding of Christianity, and that we're going back to almost early Christianity when there is not that, and that people are not assumed to have a faith background or been formed. And the more generations, the more days go by, you start to see this kind of unpeeled for you. So in saying that, I think it took an opportunity to be able to say, well, what does this look like for generosity? Have we ever explored the idea of his book, especially with the program that he's so lovingly shepherded, and said, what does it look like inside of the idea of the apostolic age in generosity? And what was it in Christendom? I think it's fair to be able to say, pray, pay, and obey was a fair amount of how we used to be able to just handle those things. It never was one of those things that says, it's just an expectation. You're there. You're going to be part of this cultural belonging. This is what grandfather did. This is what my parents did. I'm going to give. And that we understand that needs to shift. And that needs to shift because in an apostolic age, we need to be chosen, formed, and interiorized. That it cannot be any longer just resting on this idea that this is culturally something that we do. Now, most of you would say, well, that's intuitive. Of course, that makes sense. But I think a lot of times when we don't claim it, we don't see the trend, we don't see that idea, then it becomes something that we don't really fully grasp with. So what does that look like in Christendom during that time of generosity, right? That faith was culturally reinforced, giving was assumed, and that parish support was inherited, right? How many of you go to your parents' parish? No. Like you worship where your parents worship. Y'all look around. That's a pretty crazy number. Now in New Orleans, it's definitely bigger than that. It's just a little bit culturally more in that sense, right? You just kind of inherit that. But that's one of the ideas of being able to say, what is this church and this forming that we're looking at, and what does it look like in Christendom? Because it was, for the longest time, you went to your parents' parish, you went there, you gave, you were just a part of it. So generosity, so much so, was adopted in that way. Now, that stewardship, that giving, was oftentimes unconscious. It just was not in the conscious of like, well, this is just what I do because that's what they provide and that's who I am. But the reality is it wasn't that it was bad, it was sinful, but it just wasn't culturally sustained. And I think that's the part when looking at in the apostolic age for generosity that we have to back up and say, what is this going to look like? It has to be proposed. What does that mean? It has to be something that we're intentionally sharing. It has to be proposed to those that we're dealing with. It has to be chosen. It has to be internalized and lived intentionally. And so for us, if all those things are for the faith, so much generosity in that way, right? Because if we don't, because then we're understanding that our faith mimics the generosity that we're purporting or that we're sharing in our day-to-day. So if we're not sharing this kind of intentional bridge into generosity about the apostolic age, then we're missing a little bit of a piece there. So in being able to understand that evolving generosity is not primarily about money, it's about formation. Where is it that we're being formed? So giving today is obviously no longer a social expectation. It's no longer a cultural habit. It's no longer something that when you look at as being able to say, hey, as an institution, we're just going to kind of keep doing this same thing. I think most of our priests and parishes know that. I think most of our ministries know that. Peter shared the example of the ministry that I worked the longest and really cut my teeth in development was Boys Hope, Girls Hope. And it was just kind of like, hey, this program does great things for kids, and you like, this is just what you do. You give and you support them. Well, literally, what I've seen in the past 25 years is a generation go away. And then you all of a sudden are met with an organization that's burning through their endowment, wondering where they're going to offer and operate tomorrow. And there are pieces deep in the soul that really pains you to be able to see that ministry possibly going away. But there's also this call, this clarion call to each of you, to each of us, that we need to say, if we're not being intentional about this, that we're going to be in the same spot in generosity, that if we do that, the same with our parents. And what does that look like for each one of us? Obviously is a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit different, right? So it's a decision of trust. You know, we often talk about, especially the priest abuse scandal, the idea that one of the worst side effects of that was not that all of our priests, right, were guilty of anything, but it was the loss of trust that was severed. And one of the things in an apostolic age, if we're going to build generosity, is trust. And what's one of the things that builds trust the most inside of generosity that we know is a struggle for the church, and many have claimed is our next scandal? Is transparency, right? Money. So if we want to live in the apostolic age, but we're not willing to talk about transparency, how are we ever going to get there to be able to build the trust? What does that look like? It means a radical version of you being able to share everything. And if you will, for church terms, lay bare as a church. Here we are as a ministry. And I still see hesitation to this day in the church for that thing. And I'd ask you, do you still see hesitation for transparency? If that is the way that we need to survive generosity in the apostolic age, why are we not pushing and having our careers resting on this idea that we need to build trust? Because inside of trust, then it becomes something that we could then grow from. We know that generosity, in order for it to have any survival in the apostolic age, has to be a spiritual practice. We can no longer make it habitual. Do we talk about the spirituality of generosity to the masses in our bishop's appeal, to our priests, encouraging our priests to do that same, right? Having our bishop's language very intentional to make it that spiritual practice. Here's the beauty, is that it all unites us in this universal call to holiness, that we all are called to sacrificial gift of ourselves. And when we do that, we lead with the first, that we're able to hold hands with the clergy, but then it helps build trust and makes that spiritual practice practical for many of us. I want to pause for a second to be able to talk about generosity as a whole. Interesting enough, I find it quite fascinating reading the paper, other articles, news, that, and y'all know what I'm going to be talking about here when you hear this. When certain practices that the church started become kind of pop culture. Hence, getting ready for this talk. It's already in the talk. I want to talk about it. And there's a lady in New Orleans that's like saying, join me for Sober 40. Sober 40? You mean Lent? Thanks for laughing. Drink away, y'all. It's coming. Don't do that. She's pushing Sober 40. And I'm like, wait, she's saying Lent without saying Lent. This is a game. Like, how do you say Lent without saying Lent? Sober 40. You're like, oh, I know it. Oh, fasting 40. Yeah, and it's like, wait a second. This is fascinating about like generosity kind of in the same way. I saw a study come out and it started talking about the scientifically true part of generosity. And then it started talking about, right, the theologically side. It's like, okay, so we have these different components of generosity that we need to be able to unpack a little bit. Then obviously the spiritual formative part of generosity. right? Science tells us, right? Generosity reduces stress. It lowers depression. It increases longevity. It activates reward centers in the brain. What if it stopped there? Then it's no alcohol 40, right? It's the same concept. It's just this idea that like that is an important part and those things are right. And I think God knew all those things were right. But if we stop there, it's not taken in the spiritual. So on the scientific side, the secular world has helped us uncover what's great about generosity that we're not talking about. So can you then tell people that generosity is good for them and good for their soul? It'd be fantastic. But it also understands that we were intricately created by God to be generous. We were created to give. The humanistic side of that is really cool because you can take the science and say, guess what? It does all these things, lowers depression, all science has proven it. And by the way, there's spiritual benefits, and we could talk about that. Right? So obviously the Catholic theology is, I don't want to repeat some of the stuff that was said this morning so brilliantly, but obviously as simple philanthropy, right? Participating in Christ's self-emptying, the Eucharistic offering, those things, a concrete expression of stewardship and ownership. But we strive to be able to make a return. But I think one of the great gifts is that doing that in communion is only a stacked on part where the society is saying if generosity just is a human behavior, that we have spiritual element to it. And that spiritual formation, obviously, in that side, especially in the apostolic age, is that giving becomes a chosen response of trust in God. Not because everyone does it, but instead because I believe God provides. And that the societal and church needs to pivot to be able to talk better about generosity, not just in a simple way, but truly in a little bit more complex, nuanced way that responds to the apostolic age that we're in. I'm going to pause there because I want you to be able to push back and understand and see that that's a pretty significant shift from how we continue to be able to operate, that none of this is given. Again, in the very insight of the book is that our faith's not given to anybody anymore, that we have to work at it. So how do we work at it through generosity? So I wanted to be able to try to break down into 3 areas for you what that looks like of being able to live out generosity during apostolic mission. So my 3 points: teaching, innovating, and witnessing. Teaching, innovating, and witnessing. In the teaching side of the conversation, oftentimes that prepares for us is we also understand that we can't expect others to be generous. And I say this in our stewardship work for years, but never did really understand the application of this until I started talking about it in apostolic mission. That we oftentimes expect generosity, but we're not willing to teach generosity. Let me say it again. We're expecting generosity, but we're not teaching generosity. When's the last time that you deployed resources from your ministry to be able to help teach generosity? Anybody have a good example? I'd love to hear it.
I do write a stewardship article in our newspaper every month.
So you have an article to talk about generosity, to teach about it, just teaching about it. And so that kind of goes to you masses, right? Good. In apostolic mission, that's preaching to the choir in a good way, right? Yeah. But how do we get beyond that? How do we get beyond teaching generosity?
I'll say this, not from employing it, but from whoever decided to talk about the Jesuits earlier. One thing we learned is the prayer for generosity. And the youth football team that I coach, we always say that at the end.
There you go.
Learn and teach me to be generous.
Except with our points. I like that. That's good. To teach a football team, well, one, it's such a powerful prayer. But one, it touches the heart. When you pray that prayer from the heart, it's like the Our Father you pray. Like Our Father, and it's like, whoa, this is heavy. I need it. So that's great. So here's what I'm challenging. And I'll say this because I've wrestled with this with you. I had the opportunity to be able to then say, if I'm not teaching generosity, so I went and again, I'm a naive dude when it comes to like, I'm Shrek. I think I've told some of y'all that. Like, I'm just like along for the journey. I'm ready to go. So I sent an email to Dave Ramsey. He replied. Next thing you know, I was like, hey, why aren't you teaching generosity to Catholics, whatever? And he's like, well, come meet with me. I flew up there with the team and went and met with Dave Ramsey and said, hey, why don't we have a Catholic overlay into your program? Because guess what? When I tried to teach it in the diocese, I couldn't find solid resources that were actually getting into the practical piece of teaching generosity. The Lord saved me from myself. He's a sham. You got that on film? All right. It's like, Dave, come at me. He's got billions. He actually could. I'll scratch that one. My wife would be like, dude, why are you challenging Dave Ramsey? All right. So here's the point of this. I'm in a parish teaching this, and then they're like, hey, we want a deanery. I start teaching a deanery. Deanery goes from this conversation. I'm like, nobody's teaching this. I had two couples. I had no clue what I was doing. I had two couples in there on the brink of divorce, and they said, I've never heard the church talk about this. Y'all, this is generosity in the apostolic age. Get out there and go teach a course. Host it in your parish. Start teaching this. If we're going into the apostolic age, we need to be able to be more proactive in teaching the faith and teaching generosity to those, because guess what? In the human formation, it's a pain point and it's a place that we could serve. So if we go out there and we start doing that, then it could start to be able to say, hey, how do we do this? Scott mentioned earlier, he talked about the free will, being able to go back to that. Guess what? Out of matter of justice, if we're saying that your most important vocation is your family and your family doesn't have a will, then the matter of justice is that you should have a will and I should care that you should have a will. And if I don't care that you have a will and all I'm worrying about is that little clause at the bottom that gets me inside of your will for money for the church, is not also appropriate. That we need to be able to then turn around and say, you know what, part of this is because I feel justice for your family, that I don't want them scrambling for whatever this is. It's a matter of justice. We need it. Teaching, free will, what else, right? So there's other things. This idea of this, do we ever talk? It's scary. I'll be the first to tell you. Can you wear your shoes another year? Battling materialism. How do we go to be able to live the word that we continue to go? Especially you deal with major donors, right? I'm going to go sit in a suite at the Saints game and I have holes in my shoes. And that's okay, right? So it's like, what is this point? What is this tension that we're called to in generosity? Is it to battle materialism? Is it to be able to say, what are we pushing out there? And do we live it ourselves in that sense? I don't think that there's many things that we have to do to recreate what we need to do. The early church did it. What did the early church look like? It was scrappy. It was scrappy. And so that's what I'm asking you. Can you be scrappy in generosity? That half the time, the reason why it's so successful, I just say this like the bishop, he's almost going to talk about him in a second. He thought it was so good is because I cut $900,000 out of our budget. And he's like, wow. And I was like, I didn't do anything except eliminate the waste. That's not a political comment, by the way. Yeah. For those who are like, oh, here we go, we got a Trumper. That's not it. So, am I in Mariposa County? Thank you for laughing. I'm from New Orleans, and if I could crack a Mariposa County joke, that's deep. All right, anyway. So what does that mean for all of us, right? This means that in the apostolic age that we have to remember teaching is the first one. We haven't got off of the first one, teaching. What's the next one? Innovating. Right? It's stupid. We can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. Isn't that what they call stupid? Insane. Yeah, insane. What does that mean? What does that mean? When's the last time you truly have innovated in your work? When's the last time you innovated? Most of the time, it's because you don't want to fail. And more than that, it's because your bishop doesn't want to fail. It's because your executive director doesn't want you to fail. That's the God-honest truth. There's a low-lying expectation that if we don't meet the bishop's appeal mark, this is not working out. I'm discerning you for another position. What does that look like? The church has to be better at failing if we want to innovate. But guess what? We're not going to thrive in the apostolic age if we don't innovate. We're not going to thrive because we're not expecting different things. We're not expecting to be able to do something. So how can the church be better failing? You think your own ministry, how can we be better failing? We need to be better at failing. We need to give wiggle room to be able to innovate and then fall apart, pick up the pieces and say, you know what, I'm glad we tried. I had an introvert as my bishop. He's almost gone. We have a coadjutor right now. Lovely man I'd go to the cross for. Man, this guy's awesome. Archbishop Amon. He's an introvert. He didn't always give me a yes, and this is what I'm encouraging you. But he always didn't say no. And I think that that's an important piece. That we working hand in hand as lay with the church, we need to find our window where it can. Where's your window to innovate? As long as it's not a no, you need to go try. As long as it's not a no, you need to go try. You need to be able to go ask, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Can I do this? I want to start a donor advised fund program. Well, you can. I don't have the money. I want to, okay, what if I started this way? Be scrappy. Early church scrappy, right? He didn't say yes to this. He didn't say no, though. Archbishop Amon, through his leadership, had the benefit of starting I Give Catholic, and then now our Plain Giving efforts, Legacy Sunday. 2 efforts to be able to wrestle with big problems or big issues in the church. Opportunities to be able to give, and guess what? He just didn't say no. And it was his ability to recognize that he was willing to be able to fail. So the church does not need to choose between tradition and innovation, but she must steward both in service of discipleship. So how do we service both in discipleship? Well, that brings me to the third point that I think the church needs to settle into in order to be able to survive with generosity in the apostolic age, which is witnessing. I love Mary Magdalene. I love her. She's the first person to witness Jesus after the resurrection. And we got every emotion from her. Crying, trembling, excitement, all of it. How do we witness Jesus like Mary Magdalene? Sometimes we have such a polished look to the church that we're afraid for the tears. We're afraid for the troubles and the commotion, to be able to share with our donors some of the challenges. Can we be a little bit more like Mary Magdalene? The zeal that she had, the ability to be able to understand this whole part that like, y'all, there's truth. I just touched it and saw it and felt it. Do we talk about our generosity with that same zeal that Mary Magdalene would have? Do we talk about it in fear? Do we talk about it in just excitement? Do we talk about it as being able to say, you know what? This is my calling, and I came face to face with it. Because that's what's going to make you a good fundraiser, is while you first are being a witness to the truth. Because when you can witness to the truth, you can then start to really see what it is that you're bringing forth to the people. That you're not just bringing a chance to be able to accomplish this building or do this thing, but that you're taking Mary Magdalene's kind of witness and saying, I'm in there. And so Allow that zeal to overcome your heart. Allow it to penetrate the conversation when things are a little rocky with a donor and you say, you know what? I just want to make sure I'm honoring you. And then the donor starts saying, well, what do you mean? Then you say, like, how can this journey help you? How's your generosity? And you start opening up conversations that kind of deepen the part of the heart of the donor. That's not just the surface level, I have the gift, I'm going to run. That's the part that really helps us understand that that's going to allow generosity to thrive in the apostolic age. I heard Jamie mention about pilgrimages early. And I had the chance to be able to put together a pilgrimage. I had this guy who was like, man, you got to do these pilgrimages. Wait, Jeremy, right? Jeremy's like, you got to do these pilgrimages. The guy, like, I was like, do you work? I was like, I'm on pilgrimage. And it was like, dude, you got to work for a living. But he did. He was always on pilgrimage. Anyway, he convinced that we finally put one together. Top Donors is great. You know what's fantastic about it? It allowed the opportunity to be able to go deeper with this donor. And that's Richard Smith. This is my first communion picture, y'all. Thanks. Who was that? I appreciate it. I just look younger, right? So the thought is that you go on pilgrimage, you're able to have this kind of intimate relationship with the donor. And Colleen's still laughing. Peter, this is good. I got the jokes are flying here. Here's the reality. Pilgrimages allow, I told you ADHD, right? I warned you. All right, so here's the deal. Pilgrimage allows you to be able to kind of get deeper. Well, I'm on this trip and he starts sharing his heart. His wife was on the trip with us. And we talked about planting seeds for 5 years. Well, for Richard, one of the greatest gifts is that picture was in 2019. And I know you're like, damn, what'd you do the past 5 years? I had a pandemic to show for this. So we get to 2020, it was at the end of last year, it was October. I knew where I was standing when I had Richard call me. Very successful, very wealthy man. And he just was hemming and hawing about this gift that he wanted to make to the local high school. And he's calling me. It's $1 million gift. It's not even to me or through the foundation. And I said, Richard, you have to let go and let the Lord let you experience the joy of giving. You're missing the point. Your kids can't experience the joy of giving. So giving it to them, it wasn't theirs to give. You have to feel the joy in your heart and make the gift. I don't care who it is. 5 years later, it took for that relationship to get to that point. Y'all, he made the gift at the end of the year. And he has truly, he goes to our parish too. Well, we just moved parish. He came to the parish and he hugs me and he goes, I hope your children know what a gift you are. He goes, you gave me life. You let me experience the joy of what it is to be able to give it away. I feel like the Lord has touched this moment to be able to make me generous. And I have you to thank for it. Thank you. And every single time since then, it's just such a powerful moment to be able to understand that witnessing the joy of generosity is being able to understand two concepts. Both of these guys were mentioned at one point in time today. Dr. Russell James and Carnegie. But they have a theory that backs up my witnessing point, my third point. And it's this. Dr. Russell James, in his big book, has anybody heard of this? The Biblical Fundraiser in Modern Practice. Just ask ChatGPT to summarize it for you. I'm teased, I'm joking. He's going to kill it. Like, don't send that to him either. It's like, book sales plummeted. Here's the thing. It's an amazing concept, but basically in his fundraising, he talks about that biblical, I'm going to read it out loud just because it is. Biblical fundraising and Christian generosity is not about minimizing wealth, but about maximizing the joy and purpose that comes from using it for good in the present. How beautiful is that? that we're understanding that part of the apostolic mission is not that we're just asking for gifts or asking for plain gifts, but we're wanting our donors to be able to maximize the joy in their giving. Do you take that approach? Carnegie said something not far from it. And obviously, it's a little haunting. I love my daughter's high school, Mount Carmel in New Orleans. She came back and she's like, Dad, I read this article about Carnegie that's really crazy. And she says, you know, he has that quote that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. What do you think about that, Mrs. Benson? And I'm like, oh gosh, don't get into my work. And I was like running off stage, I was like, what are you talking about? And she says, well, what does that mean? She says, his theory is that if you die with your money, it's not truly philanthropic. Because it's actually just releasing the money after you die, which means you can't release anything. Which is the fascinating part about this piece, that these two guys have a concept that I think is going to help us in the apostolic age, which is to be able to find the joy in the big donors to give it away now. Now, that's not a rant about endowments, Mr. Brian Newbriggy. That is a rant about being able, because once you give it to them, you're turning over your giving, right, to another entity. You're actually being generous. But it's a bigger point, which is this. Are you allowing your donors to feel the joy of the gift now and encouraging that so that they understand what that means? We changed our definition in our Legacy Sunday program to be able to make sure that it captured that fully by saying your legacy is the spiritual and material impact you have on your family and community by how you live and what you leave behind. How you live, that's now. So we have a now component to legacy so that that's never lost, because that's an important part. The church has always adapted, right? We know that over the years. Sometimes it's slow. We talk about oil tankers and other things that are slow to turn. But the reality is that the church has. But that inside of these three areas, in order for the apostolic mission to be able to work, that we continue to be able to have to look at different things, again, teaching, innovation, and witness. But we also know that part of our gift and part of what we have to be able to do is that we have to be able to meet people where they are. And in the Christendom, that wasn't the case. You know how much we pander donors that Father didn't do 30 years ago? Oh, Father, what do you think? Give me a check. You know, that's my best impression of my pastor when I was a kid, which it sounded somewhat similar to that. But it was kind of like, you know, there was no other ifs, ands, or buts. There was no conversation. There wasn't asking questions. It was you give your money. And now we have a lot more, right? That's a shift. That's the apostolic age. And so the idea is that where do we meet people where they are? And then walk with them as they grow, right? Being able to lower the friction for generosity. Do we consider ways to be able to lower the friction for generosity? By restoring participation with them. We talked about a few things that we talked about earlier, like lowering the gift. Andrew's kind of idea was like, hey, an annual gift. If you're on that journey, that's a way of reducing friction and restoring that participation, right? So that a lower gift leads to a larger relationship down the road. But it's being able to understand that, what are you bringing them into? And meeting people where they are is easy enough, but I think one of the things is that we then can analyze and see that the journey of donors going through a process, everything from young adults, obviously the spontaneous digital giving, families, the recurring stewardship or the low barrier, allowing them to be able to participate. It starts to be able to understand that our evolution is understanding the phase where they are and being able to see that phase where they are so that we could then help them to be generous where they are. And when you're able to start doing that through your portfolio, through your relationships, through your communications, you then are able to start seeing people everywhere that there is not one way to do this, but this is really complex. I saw that, it was a video I saw a while ago, and it was like the 1956 vault at the Olympics or whatever, and it was like, da, 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 10. Right. And it was like, oh God, this is kind of cool. And it's like 20, 24. And they're like doing flips. It's like, 9.5. And it was like, where's the expectations gone? That we've sometimes built our expectations of generosity out of the norm of where it is to be able to meet and journey with somebody. So understanding where they are in life helps you to be able to better set your expectations so that you're generous. And by the way, when you do that, it starts to respect what? Their humanity, their free will, that this is something that is a little different. I'm going to switch a little bit while I have a few minutes, and I want to say this, that, applying it today can be difficult, and I only have my lived experience, so what I'm going to share is just what I've wrestled with the past year. And I share this as an example, it's for what it is. But I went to a pastor, and that pastor, again, I already gave out a bead. I went to the pastor with this. But if you have Mardi Gras, what happens? Oh, hey! Let's try that again. Father, try to catch this. Hey! Oh! That's what happens at Mardi Gras, by the way, Father. What do you have in your hand? Okay, good. What do you have in your hand? A chicken. What is that? What is it? It is the only way that the priest used to accept an offertory. Think about it. Some priests, still in this world, only accept chickens. I pulled this story on a Ugandan priest, and he's like, why are you talking about my parish? He said that. I'm not kidding around. That was last year. What is that? What is the rubber chicken? What is it? It's a currency. It was a currency. And the currency and the point of this is fun. This is, by the way, anybody like Dave's hot chicken? Is that right? People are like, where's this guy going? I went to the restaurant, they had the chicken. I almost stole one. But we throw them at Mardi Gras, so I didn't. But if you go to Dave's Hot Chicken, that's like their mascot. He's on a cup, if you like hot chicken. So the question is where do we see it today? And what is the point of this? The point of this is that in church, in this apostolic age, if we're not shifting our minds, we're not thinking the right way. When I went to the priest and I gave him the chicken, guess what? He looked at me crazy just like you're looking at me crazy. And you know what I told him? I said, guess what, Father? You tell me who was the first person that didn't take chickens? Who? There had to be somebody who. Because guess what? At some point in time, chickens stopped becoming popular to give to church. Bring one to church and see what happens. So what happened? They started putting coins. Then they started putting bills. Guess what, y'all? The coins and the bills are going with the chickens. Are we responding as a church? I had to ask that question. I'm with you. I'm in your seat. I'm asking the question, how do we do this? So what do? I end up just going back home and I start talking to my wife and she's like, all right, a little too much. But here's the deal. I was like, I have an idea. And it's this. Why don't we put a credit card machine in a basket?
Just tap.
Why not? Hey, this is your chicken. Where's your chicken? What do you do? Where do you put it? Where's your money? When you go buy a Snickers and a Coke after this because you're sick of me hearing me talk, what are you paying for it with? Credit card. Probably about 90% of you are paying with a credit card. So if we're not meeting the people where they are, and we're just saying, by the way, you have to either give it online, you have to do something else, we're not absolutely being able to respect their autonomy to be able to give in the way that they want to. And so the question was, and I decided I had to do something about it. So this is what I did in my spare time in the past year. I launched this basket, and it's called Woven. And the idea is this, is that the offertory basket is not empty because generosity gone. It's empty because what? Cash is gone. And the reality is that I was like, in order for this to work, I needed to do a pilot. So I went to my principal at high school. What do you think he said? I'm not kidding around. I brought that chicken to the restaurant. And I said, I want to try to pay for this meal with this chicken. He's like, Cory, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, it takes credit card. Do you take credit card, Father? And that was the point. And next thing you know, he's like, okay. I figured if I could go with him, he preaches his Sunday Mass, Immaculate Conception downtown. Have you ever been in New Orleans? It's across from the Roosevelt Hotel. It's a beautiful hotel, Christmas and all that stuff. Downtown parish, struggling. So what did I do? I brought him the basket and I said, why don't we give it a try? That was 2 months ago. The first month we raised $6,000 in that basket. And he said, why haven't I done this earlier? Why have I not wrestled with this idea to be able to meet people's generosity? Because I was afraid what they would think of me. I was afraid of what it would do. I was afraid of the comments that come around to it. Here's the reality. Cashless and tap to pay, 41% of Americans say they carry no cash at all. More than 90% of U.S. retailers. How many churches? 2? Handful, right? We don't wrestle with this problem. Why is it? Right? So people today, they carry their phones, not cash. Tap cards, right? They're budget digitally. They manage generosity across platforms. But yet we often ask them to give in church, in Mass, in a very narrow moment. That's their offertory, in a very narrow moment of the Mass. But yet we use an outdated method with no bridge to their lived reality. Look, I'm okay. Push back against me. But their lived reality is credit cards. And we're not meeting them where they are. So that gap creates silence in the offertory. But don't mistake that for disinterest. Don't mistake silence in the offertory as disinterest. Maybe we're just not meeting them where they are. So it was born out of a simple question. How do we preserve the sacred moment of offertory in a cashless world? Where can we innovate in this apostolic age? It's about really trying to understand and restoring the participation, the visibility, and intentionality. It allows the ritual to remain physical, the act to remain communal, and the method to meet modern behavior. We had to overcome a number of things, obviously. The timing was one crazy thing. But I was able to get the transaction time down to 4 to 6 seconds so that you tap and pass it along. It's amazingly fast, and it took a little while to be able to get there, but it's a tap to pay so that you can tap and pass the basket. But it feels like it belongs because it's in a basket. We had to get the credit card fee below 3%. We had to be able to understand that the IRS requirements is receding for $250 or more, so we couldn't receive that, so we had to treat it like cash. All these things navigating through this pilot, including the worst is old ushers. We had a guy coming down the basket imagines the pew, and he's like, here, credit card basket. Here, credit card basket. And it's like, it's so awkward. Why you get away from me? He's like, dude, that's really like, and I'm like, I'm trying to pay with a credit card. He's like, oh, it's, and they had tried QR codes, by the way. Why didn't it work? Website, you have to put in your phone number, your address. Where is the action that happens already? We take out our card, we take cash. Can I just take a credit card and tap and then be able to move it on? And understanding that all of this is just wrestling with this idea of how do we meet people where they are? So my wife and I launched this company, and we just launched it today. It took a year. So it's 2 months that we did the pilot, and we finally worked out a deal that we're going to be able to put these baskets out there. The website's fresh, it's new, it's not really the best, but it's a conversation that I hope that you have, not necessarily about the basket, as much as it is understanding this. We have to adapt. We have to innovate. We have to be able to change how we're doing. And it's just my little part of the world that I'm trying to wrestle with, but I wrestle with you to be able to help you understand that something has to change if we want generosity to blossom in the church. Something has to change if we want generosity to blossom in the church. And what does that look for all of us? The reality is it's a calling for all of us in the apostolic age. If we don't take this personally, we're going to continue to operate in Christendom standards, an assumption that people are going to be generous. And if we do that, we're going to get left behind the same as we would in the faith. And though Monsignor Shea was ahead of time for that, it really helped me kind of solidify this as the Lord broke open one piece to me. And it was this. It was through this other opportunity we had through the foundation. I had the opportunity to be able to commission 4 paintings, what we call the 4 Saints of Generosity. And I was really inspired by one person in the early church, and it really was understanding the spirit of the apostolic age. And it was St. Paul. And St. Paul, fascinating enough, truly to me, became my inspiration for what it looked like to raise money in the apostolic age. I didn't realize that the church has the great gift of patron saints, but didn't realize it came from a veneration of individuals. And that veneration from individuals is what brings that forth, not just some book. I thought there was a book at the Vatican like, ooh, can't find his dog. That's Anthony. Did you not know that there's no book, right? There's nothing there. It's just like, so what did that look like for me? So I was like, you know what? I'm going to start praying to St. Paul for this. And I nicknamed him the patron saint of fundraisers. You've never seen a letter like Paul's from prison begging for help. If you really think about it, he says, send money. And by the way, I have this trusted friend, Titus. Let me help you out. His prison letters are absolutely at the heart of every fundraiser. And as of what I know, we have a patron saint of philanthropists in Catherine Drexel, often and widely kind of held across foundation world, but we don't have a patron saint of fundraisers. And so here I ask today and invoke his intercession that St. Paul pray for us. Thank y'all.
For a couple minutes. Can you say a little bit about the pilot and how that went?
Sure. The part where the secretary ran me out or no? There's an old cranky secretary at this parish. This is a downtown parish. I went to high school with her son, which was my only saving grace. I'm telling you, I would have been run out. And I was like, so Father agreed to it, but he didn't tell the secretary. And so I go meet with her. I'm like, Judy, and she's we call yats, which is like that's just a loving New Orleans term for somebody that speaks funny. So anyway, so she's like a heavy yat, and she's like, what, baby? She's like, what you need? And I was like, well, we have these baskets. I ain't doing no baskets. Take those baskets out of here. And I was like, well, Father didn't tell you? So the first thing is it's a mental leap. Couple learning pieces from this. Fascinating enough, it took a month to change a behavior, but the biggest shift, I grew up the past 20 years, I was in a parish with a pass basket. They still had their basket on a stick. That was a heavy, heavy lift for the old ushers to get over. It was. It was like, I made a meme, I should have put up here. It was of Moses, and he's like, let my baskets go. Like, they would walk around with the basket and like hold it while you're pulling out your credit card. I'm like, dude, like I did Father. I'm telling you, it was odd. But the point is the basket behavior is important to talk about. How many people know on average what it is that of parishioners that use online giving? It hovers around 42%, 45%, right? That's typically what it is. So what are the other 60% doing? You're getting crumbs from. But we're like, oh, we got this. We don't need it. We have QR codes, right? And it was like, well, how much did you make last week for QR codes? Don't ask me that question. So it took a lot of nuancing of the conversation to be able to understand that it's not that bad. Then you have the other part of fees. That's why we really worked to get it under 3%, because every parish I'd ask, what's your online transaction fee? Do you take gifts on your website? And they're like, yes, we did that in 96. And I'm like, okay, great. What's your fee price? And they're like, oh, it's 4.2. And I'm like, I got you a deal. I had to have that as a low barrier to get them into it. The other piece. It's kind of a hood parish. That's just what we call in New Orleans. I don't know, it's rough, dude. I'm telling you, it's rough. And it's homeless, and one of the devices went missing. And it was like, Father's like, Cory, I'm so sorry. I'm like, it's called insurance, Father. It's all right. So I had to be flexible with the idea of like, listen, what we need to be able to do is to be able to get it in their hands and just the behavior changing. And that's the thing that's been most exciting, is that you see the behavior changing, that yes, I buy my Snickers and a credit card this way and I could give $10 to the church. And at Christmas, I could give 1,000. And those kind of things are just patience while that behavior is changed. But guess what? The first guy not offering chickens is probably pretty painful. Like, Father, you're not taking my chicken. But get that thing out of here. Get it out. Get that chicken out of here. Who said no to the chicken? It happened in the church, y'all. That happened in the church. Somebody said, no more chickens. My first thing, I want somebody to be a guinea pig for the first cashless parish. Anyway, keep going. We'll come back here. Go.
Have you looked at other faith denominations for embracing this kind of technology change?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I'm meeting with this guy. It's kind of funny. It's just because I know him from some other things. This guy's by the name of John Georges, and he's Greek Orthodox. And he loves the church, and he's convinced we're going to change Easter. I love it. It's great. I'm all in. I love conversations with him. And he says after we get this going, he's like, I want this in the Greek Orthodox Church. So it's kind of interesting because other denominations have wrestled with a couple of things. There are hot tabs or spots that you can touch that would then bring you to a website, but it's fiddling with the phone. What we were trying to do is to be able to help the process of the offertory without fiddling with your phone. And the credit card's the only natural thing that you've taken out of cash that you then are able to be able to tap, go, and pass on. So it was kind of like that idea of they were really against fiddling with the phone in the Greek Orthodox Church. And he says, I want it because I don't want people fiddling with their phone. Even though you can Apple Pay with this, it's kind of interesting. You could just open up your app and Apple Pay on your phone. But even that's quicker because as you open your wallet on Apple Pay or Google Pay, you just touch it and it activates.
Do you give them options to select, or they enter the amount?
So we have a preset selection, and then they select it and then are able to, and you literally, you just touch it, you touch the credit card and you pass and it goes on.
So what your favorite change management strategy resources or that you've seen done?
That I'm not going away, honestly. And that their problem's not going away of not having cash. And I say that, he was asking, just to repeat, what is my change management, like how do you kind of go into that change? I met with every single usher face to face, and I asked Father if I could. I said, Father, I want to meet with the ushers. And I had 2 out of the 12 buck me and say, and I was like, I just kind of kept going. And so I'd show up, I'd bring my whole family, and we'd go to mass there. And they'd say, all right, we have to do this. So tenacity is probably the number one thing that I was willing to be able to fight through. But the behavior was that when they realized we shared the Christmas earnings with the parish, and Father's like, I normally don't, he's like, I wanted to share it to them to show them that this is important for our parish to survive.
What about tracking the donors? So I know sometimes.
Hey, she just touched on something. There is no doubt the fastest way to make the basket stop in your track is if you ask them a question. So what's the hindrance there? The hindrance is that you would normally get their email address at minimum. But the problem is getting their email address makes the collection not work. So the balance there is that if you don't collect over the machine, a limit to $249 so that you don't have to receipt them. So it's treated like cash. So somebody can make a gift of up to $249 multiple times if they wanted to, please and thank you. But that's the biggest thing. So we do not have information. That's probably the downside. Now, just in being nerdy and reading about it, they said in the next 4 or 5 years, all that's going to be embedded more, that we're not going to have to deal with that. But I cut that process out.
So really it is
replacing someone having like $5, I'm gonna put it in, you don't get their donor info, you don't.
Correct. It's like cash. And that's why we made it this way, is so that it still takes envelope and cash, right? We couldn't have it where it was just one thing and not the other. You had to be able to have it work inside of the relationship.
What was the actual result?
So the actual result in December was about $6,500 that came in to the parish, and January was right around $3,000.
Compared to last year, though.
Compared to last year, so that's just credit card giving. It showed a true bump. Again, it's early to be able to get full replies for y'all, but the bump is that their cash remained the same. That this was showing that this was people that were not giving to their parish before.
All in favor of Cory being the sponsor for the dinner next year?
Yeah. Well, then get your orders in, baby. The abundance chain at it again.
Cory, I love that you and your team created I Give Catholic. I love that you created the Legacy Sunday concept. But for those of you who don't know, he does a Sunday across the Archdiocese of New Orleans where the entirety of the parish infrastructure now asks families to prayerfully consider a legacy gift. Can you imagine the difference in the church if we implemented that now on an annual basis?
And that came over a steak dinner with Peter. It did. Remember you asked that?
The whole point of this
In Oklahoma.
how can you in your own ministry be innovative? And how can you do things a little differently, your own way, your own time? Now, the front row is from a place called Prairie Town, Texas, which is outside of a town called Amarillo, where I grew up. And they are out in the boonies. What can they do that is different and unique to help raise money for their community?
Fake chicken.
Right?
Steak chicken.
We do have some.
But I love this higher level thinking. You in your own ministry have the ability to do something unique and different. Tim Dockery on the back row next to Monsignor Landry and I had a conversation recently about, gifts at the top end of the spectrum. Can you do a $1 million a year club? And also the Gary Thomas, St. Jude, $11 a month, or Tunnels to Towers for $11 a month, where they're raising millions of dollars very innovatively from $11 gifts. Both are important in what we do. Gonna think through what works for your ministry. Anyway, Cory, thank you.
Thank you very
much.
much.